History often remembers Michael Jordan as an untouchable deity, a figure who floated above the hardwood, immune to gravity and defeat. We remember the 6 championships, the cigars, and the inevitable triumphs. But history is convenient. It tends to scrub away the blood, the bruises, and the years of humiliating failure that preceded the glory. Before Michael Jordan could become the greatest player of all time, he had to survive a war. He had to walk through fire, and that fire was ignited in the grim, industrial city of Detroit. This is not just a story about basketball games. This is the story of a physical and psychological assault designed to break the will of a rising superstar. This is the story of the bad boys Pistons, the Jordan rules, and the brutal rite of passage that forged the Chicago Bulls dynasty. Without the villains, there is no hero, and make no mistake, the Detroit Pistons were the greatest villains the NBA has ever seen. The rise of the outcasts. To understand the war, you must first understand the soldiers. The late 1980s Detroit Pistons were not built like the glamorous Los Angeles Lakers or the aristocratic Boston Celtics. They were a reflection of their city. Tough, unapologetic, and angry. While the NBA was trying to market the finesse of Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, the Pistons arrived like a demolition crew at a black-tie dinner. Led by the smiling assassin Isiah Thomas and the physical enforcer Bill Laimbeer, they didn't just want to beat you. They wanted to hurt you. They took pride in the fact that the rest of the world hated them. They wore black sneakers when everyone else wore white. They fouled hard. They intimidated referees. They were a band of outcasts who realized that if they couldn't outscore the high-flying teams, they could simply beat them into submission. And in the middle of their ascent to power, they saw a threat rising in Chicago. A young, individual genius named Michael Jordan, who was scoring points at a rate the league had never seen. The Jordan rules legalized violence. The conflict began in earnest during the 1988 playoffs. The Pistons knew they couldn't guard Jordan one-on-one. He was too fast, too athletic, and too skilled. So, head coach Chuck Daly, a defensive mastermind who dressed like a GQ model but thought like a street fighter, devised a strategy that would become infamous: the Jordan rules. The concept was simple in theory but barbaric in execution. If Jordan went to the bathroom, a Piston player was supposed to go with him. But on the court, the rules were specific. Force him left, double team him the moment he touched the ball, and if he drove to the basket, put him on the ground. Not just a foul, a message. They decided that every time Jordan took flight, he would pay a physical price. Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, and Dennis Rodman were the executioners. They turned the paint into a no-fly zone. When you watch the footage today, it is shocking. These weren't basketball plays. They were assaults that would result in multi-game suspensions and flagrant ejections in the modern era. Clotheslines, body checks, elbows to the ribs. It was psychological warfare manifested physically. The goal was to make Jordan fear the air. They wanted him to second-guess his drive. They wanted him to look for the defender before he looked for the rim. For 3 straight years, the strategy worked to perfection. The Pistons didn't just beat the Bulls, they battered them. The years of pain: 1988, 1989, 1990. The late 80s were a graveyard for Michael Jordan's ambitions. In 1988, the Pistons crushed the Bulls in 5 games. In 1989, the Bulls got closer, pushing the series to 6 games. But the result was the same: Jordan walking off the court, battered and defeated, while Isiah Thomas celebrated. But the absolute nadir, the lowest point of the saga, came in 1990. The Eastern Conference Finals went to a decisive Game 7. The Bulls were ready. They believed it was finally their time. But fate and physical frailty intervened. Scottie Pippen, Jordan's lieutenant, suffered a blinding migraine headache just before tip-off. He was practically useless, a ghost on the court. Jordan played heroically in that Game 7, pouring in 31 points, but he was fighting an entire army by himself. The Pistons swarmed him. They knocked him down, picked him up, and knocked him down again. The Bulls lost by nearly 20 points. The image of Jordan crying on the bus after that game is the defining moment of his pre-championship career. The critics were loud. They said Jordan was nothing more than a glorified scorer. They said he was Dominique Wilkins with better PR. They said you could not win a championship with a scoring champion as your best player. The Pistons had proven, for the third year in a row, that a disciplined, violent team could dismantle a solitary genius. Jordan was at a crossroads. He could have demanded a trade. He could have demanded that management fire the coach. Instead, he decided to change his body. The transformation, the Breakfast Club. The summer of 1990 was the turning point for the entire history of the NBA. Michael Jordan realized that his talent alone was not enough to overcome the brutality of the Pistons. He needed armor. He began working with trainer Tim Grover, establishing the famous Breakfast Club. Jordan, usually naturally lean, spent months adding 15 pounds of pure muscle to his upper body and shoulders. He didn't do this to look good. He did this specifically to absorb the contact from Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn. He was preparing for a street fight. Mentally, the shift was even more profound. Jordan stopped trusting only himself and began to trust the triangle offense instituted by Phil Jackson. He realized that the Pistons' entire defensive scheme was predicated on stopping him. If he moved the ball, if he trusted Pippen and Horace Grant, the Jordan rules would collapse. The Pistons were betting that Jordan's ego would be his downfall. Jordan decided to kill his ego to kill the Pistons. When the 1990-91 season began, the Bulls were a different animal. They were focused, they were stronger, and they were no longer afraid of the bullies from Detroit. The sweep, the exorcism of 1991. The inevitable rematch happened in the 1991 Eastern Conference Finals. The script was set for another long, grueling war. But the Bulls flipped the script entirely. This wasn't a war, it was an execution. In Game 1, the Bulls stood their ground. When the Pistons tried to intimidate them, Pippen and Grant pushed back. Jordan didn't force shots, he dissected the defense. The Bulls won. In Game 2, they won again. By Game 3, the Pistons looked old. Their legs were gone, tired from 3 straight trips to the finals. But more importantly, their psychological edge had evaporated. The bully tactics no longer worked because the victim refused to be a victim. Game 4 was the coronation. The Bulls completed a humiliating sweep of the defending champions in Detroit. The visuals of that series were striking. Jordan driving into the teeth of the defense, taking the hit, finishing the layup, and staring down Laimbeer. The fear was gone. The Jordan rules had been solved by muscle, maturity, and teamwork. The dynasty of the Bad Boys was ending not with a bang, but with a whimper. They were completely outclassed by the monster they had helped create. The walk-off, the ultimate disrespect. The end of the rivalry produced one of the most controversial moments in sports history. With 7.9 seconds left in Game 4, realizing their reign was over, Isiah Thomas told his teammates to walk off the court. They marched past the Bulls bench, heads down, refusing to shake hands. No congratulations, no passing of the torch, just bitterness and spite. It was a classless move that stained the legacy of the Bad Boys forever, but in a way, it was the perfect ending. They were villains to the very last second. Jordan later said that the walk-off didn't bother him because he knew he had broken their spirit. That moment of disrespect fueled Jordan even further. He realized that he hadn't just beaten them, he had ended them. The Pistons would never be relevant in the same way again, while the Bulls would go on to win the NBA title a few weeks later, starting a run of 6 championships in 8 years. Conclusion: the necessity of the villain. Looking back, we must ask the question, would Michael Jordan be the GOAT without the Detroit Pistons? The answer, comfortably, is no. The Pistons forced Jordan to evolve. They forced him to hit the weight room. They forced him to trust his teammates. They forced him to develop a killer instinct that was sharper than any razor. The Bad Boys were the fire that tempered the steel. They beat him up until he became unbreakable. In the modern NBA, rivals are friends. They work out together in the summer. They join each other's teams. But the Bulls-Pistons war was a relic of a different time. A time when hatred was genuine, and respect had to be taken by force. The Bad Boys of Detroit may be remembered as the villains of the story, but they deserve a thank you note from every basketball fan in Chicago. Because by trying to destroy Michael Jordan, they inadvertently built the greatest champion the world has ever seen.